Welcome to Earth. I'm your host. Things are not looking so good for America right now. We know what's happened to the Republican Party.
Bing, bing, bong. I could shoot somebody.
They are some of the most dangerous dictators Trump impressed.
Even gangsters have morals. He doesn't even know what that means.
Apparently, the Republican Party will stop at nothing to acquire power, even if it means the total destruction of themselves and the planet along with them. The Democrats, however, they're also ignoring science, social science specifically. I called Keith Spencer, the senior editor of Salon magazine, to find out why he wrote this particular article, which is a fascinating translation of the brilliant economist Thomas Piketty's work.
A lot of people follow Thomas Piketty's work. His book, Capital in the 21st Century, was written about a lot. He and his team write a lot of papers since then, and they specifically study sort of like poverty and inequality and elections data in a really, really rigorous way, like laborious in terms of his analyses. Our readers seem to really like, and I really like demystifying some of his papers because they're presented for a more technical, like advanced audience, but they have a lot of lessons that he doesn't just come out and say.
So just to give a little context here, Thomas Piketty's work is revolutionary. It's influenced the entire modern generation of economists today.
My book is trying to put facts and to put history and to put data in one of the most controversial issues in history, which is the issue of inequality and unequal income and wealth, an issue about which people have been fighting for centuries.
Piketty has studied 2.5 centuries of data on Western democracies, 250 years.
I look at over 20 countries in the world.
The data shows something really interesting in terms of voter trends, why people vote the way they do, and holds the secret as to the demise of the Democratic Party. But first, we got to talk about the invention of the middle class.
The big thesis of Capital in the 21st Century was that a lot of the ideas that we have in the West of what the middle class is, this idea that you can be born in whatever station you are in the United States or in other Western countries, and that you can get a job that can support your family and you can go to college if you want to. You have this set of freedoms, that situation, which sort of peaked in the 50s, 60s, 70s, that was actually very historically unusual. Throughout history, in general, the richest and most powerful people in society are pretty good at maintaining a status quo that benefits them. And the only reason that this stopped the US around the 40s and 50s and 60s is because of the labor movement resulted in a lot of social welfare programs and much more equitable distribution of wealth to some degree. So since then, the social welfare state in the US has been sort of slowly getting chipped away at, the type of Great Society programs that you saw like under Johnson and Kennedy, and then previously the sort of remnants of the New Deal. Taxation of the wealthiest Americans when Eisenhower was president was 90%.
It all gets down to this fundamental concept that there's no such thing really as a self-made person. And that's the way we used to think, that when you generate an enormous amount of wealth, that you're not the only person who's generating that wealth. It's kind of a collaborative process.
There's been this interesting shift in terms of how poor and less educated voters vote in the Western world in the last 70 years. Poor people, less educated people voted for left and left liberal parties, Democrats in the US, Labour in the UK, the Liberal Party in Canada. And then the high income, high education voters vote for the right-wing parties. And so something shifted in the last 70 years.
And what Thomas Piketty found was that elites continued to vote for right-wing parties, but they were joined by so-called left-wing elites, which had until that point been an oxymoron. So what was happening?
What the historic left parties in these countries has shifted, particularly on economic issues.
Now the so-called liberal parties were championing the same causes as the elites on the right.
Increasing income inequality, lower taxation on the rich, deindustrialization of the United States. It's interesting because it actually explains like why Trump and Bolsonaro, the unsuccessful rise of Le Pen in France, Brexit, like a lot of these sort of right populist movements have happened because these left liberal parties have sort of moved so far to the right on a lot of economic issues that a lot of these poor voters don't even really recognize them or see them as being able to change their lives.
So understanding this provides some really illuminating insights as to an almost predictable backlash that would take place against a so-called Democratic Party that's more democratic in name than it is in substance. Hence the critique of being virtue signalers and so forth. If you're pro-multiculturalism, pro-gay rights, gay marriage, pro-choice, pro-women, but don't represent the economic interests of any of those groups or others, what's the uniting factor?
This is sometimes called rainbow capitalism, sort of a multicultural, like LGBTQ-friendly corporate utopia. Surface level fight for racial and gender equality are very separate and different from fighting something like income inequality. To do anything that would realistically, make us a more equal country would challenge the bottom line of, the richest people in the world, and not just in the country, but in the world.
The Congress is going about its corporate business as if nothing's happening out there.
So there's all these voters out there who are like, well, my life is really difficult and none of these candidates speak to me. And then maybe they hear Trump go on stage and he says, I'm going to make America great again. The problem is immigrants. The reason that you're poor is because other people are taking your job. These immigrants are coming, right? And that's an economic argument. It's factually untrue, but he's giving an economic solution. Sanders is doing the same thing, but he's correctly diagnosed the problem as being because of rich people like Trump who have manipulated levers of society for all these years. So
what do working class people do about that? Well, one option is just to do away with democracy.
As we heard, white nationalists are praising the president.
Cast your votes behind the strongest representative of your tribe.
Show me what democracy looks like!
The other better option is to double down on democracy, but that would mean we have to fix a system we know is broken.
Because of some legal decisions in the US, rich people can donate a lot of money to the political candidate of their choice. These repeated studies over the years that show again and again that the candidate with more money almost always wins. If that's the case, think about how dependent you are on having more money if you're a candidate. And the easiest way to get that is just to appeal to rich people, right? So many of our politicians, they can't enact policies that will threaten the bottom lines of the wealthy people because they're sort of their benefactors.
And there aren't that many innocent parties in this whole predicament. Now, the media are happy to report on the culture war because that keeps driving viewers because conflict sells. But it rarely gets to the depth that's required to really challenge or change the status quo, except for at a very, very slow pace that's not keeping up with the requirements of technology and the climate crisis and the economic woes of the majority of the country. And most Americans are aware of this, and that's why they've become so cynical watching the political class try to game this obviously transactional media system using wedge issues like abortion, gun control. And these are issues that could easily be solved with compassionate and rational people sitting around a table together. But that wouldn't sell advertising dollars, and it wouldn't expand the political power of a very wealthy, greedy, cynical group of people who would rather tribalize us.
And that is what led this sort of low education, low income voters to not even show up at the polls, right? One of the biggest reasons Trump won was actually because a lot of people stayed home. Just neither candidate was compelling to a lot of people.
No, it's not as if inequality has to rise indefinitely or inequality will reduce naturally. There's nothing natural in the history of income and wealth distribution. So the market economy is great at producing new wealth, but sometimes it can be quite bad at generating a distribution of wealth that is equitable in the long run.
So what Piketty's data is actually providing for us is a roadmap on how to escape the trap of tribalism and cynicism and unite behind universal global human objectives. I mean, what else is money and wealth for other than to provide for our basic needs?
Housing, safety, shelter, food, water, the ability to access post-secondary education. You can't fulfill your dreams if you can't afford the education for that. Connected to working people's struggles all over the whole world. Goods and services, they're made all over the entire planet, right? And this is something that the US and our politicians are historically very bad at, partly because we often forget these other countries exist, but like the rich and these big multinational corporations benefit from people being balkanized and people being separated.
And so because of that incentive, there's this myth that gets propagated all the time that we need a centrist. A centrist is going to be the one that's going to unite us all. And there are all these polls that show that likely voters, quote unquote, are going to go for a centrist. But first of all, the word centrist is a total misnomer. It's not the center of our political, philosophical, or religious diversity. It's not the center of all of our basic needs. It's the center of the political establishment.
This is where I'm going to draw something for people who are watching. So this line is just like voters, put it close to the camera. So basically just imagine a bar. There's a center and there's left and right.
Yep.
Right. And this is like how a lot of pundits see the next election. If we nominate somebody too far to the left, we won't get any of these voters over here, right? Not going to vote for Sanders, so we can't nominate him because he'll lose. Some people said that about Trump in 2016. Like we've elected somebody too far to the right. We're not going to get any of these voters. Yeah. But what Piketty shows is that this is wrong because there's people who may be way over here, depending on, they hear both Trump and Bernie appeal to them to some degree, or some of them neither appeal to them. So a more accurate way of thinking about it is that only the people in the circle vote, and a left egalitarian candidate will add all these other additional voters will actually vote for them, those who wouldn't have voted if you elect a centrist.
Right.
So that kind of candidate will win in a landslide because you've taken all these people who wouldn't vote at all and added them to this.
And what Piketty also tells us is that this is the only type of candidate who's going to be able to bring us back to a world where the middle class exists.
You've got somebody that's going to inspire the base. The base here of the Democratic Party are women, people of color, and young adults between 18 and 35. That's 70% of who's going to vote next year.
Right.
70% of the electorate is what I just described.
So the most effective action that we can take for our democracy is to not only nominate a candidate for president who does not take money from billionaires who end up dictating his or her policies, but to remove money from the equation entirely.
The big mass mobilization for amending the Constitution to end Citizens United and get money out of politics, that would have a trickle-up effect.
While continuing to advance our civil rights and human rights struggle that we've been engaged in since the birth of the nation.